The market square of Thornhaven bustled with activity, as the autumn wind carried the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread through the crowd. Alara pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the way her stomach clenched at the smells she couldn't afford. "Alara, I'm hungry," Lark whispered, tugging at her sleeve with small fingers. Her younger brother was only 8 winters old, too young to understand why they couldn't simply buy the honeyed rolls that other pups devoured without a second thought. "I know, little one," Alara murmured, steering him away from the baker's stall. "We'll eat at home. I saved something for us." It was a lie. She had exactly 1 portion of dried fish and half a potato waiting in their crumbling cottage at the edge of pack territory. Barely enough for 1, let alone 2. But Lark didn't need to know that. He'd already lost too much for a child his age. The Thornhaven pack had gathered today for the monthly tribute collection. Beta Valdric stood on the raised platform at the center of the square, his cold eyes scanning the crowd as pack members brought forward their offerings. Furs, preserved meats, crafted goods all flowing toward the pack's coffers, while families like hers scraped by on whatever scraps remained. "Where's the Alpha King?" A young wolf near Alara muttered to his companion. "It's been 3 moons since anyone's seen him. Valdric says he's on a sacred journey," the other replied with a shrug. "Testing alliances with the northern territories." Alara had heard the rumors too. Some whispered that the Alpha King was dead. Others claimed he'd abandoned them completely, leaving Valdric to rule in his absence. She didn't know what to believe anymore. All she knew was that life had grown harder since the Alpha King had vanished, and wolves like her unmated Omegas with no family connections had fallen through the cracks. "Move aside, Omega." A heavy shoulder knocked into her, sending Alara stumbling. She caught herself against a wooden post, automatically pulling Lark behind her. The wolf who'd shoved her didn't even glance back. None of them ever did. "Are you all right?" Lark asked, his small face pinched with worry. "I'm fine," Alara assured him, though her shoulder throbbed. "Let's go home." They were weaving through the thinning crowd when Alara spotted him. A beggar sat slumped against the stone wall of the blacksmith's forge, wrapped in rags so filthy she could barely distinguish cloth from dirt. His head hung low, matted dark hair obscuring his features. A wooden bowl sat empty before him, ignored by every wolf who passed. As Alara watched, a young alpha male deliberately kicked the bowl, sending it clattering across the cobblestones. "Filthy, vagrant," he spat. "We don't need your kind stinking up our pack." The beggar didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't raise his head. Something about that stillness made Alara pause. There was no cowering in his posture despite his wretched state. His shoulders, though hunched, held a certain set to them. His hands, visible beneath the ragged sleeves, were large and scarred in ways that spoke of battles, not begging. "Alara, come on," Lark urged, pulling her hand. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away. The beggar slowly raised his head, and Alara's lungs seized. Beneath the grime and the tangled hair were features that seemed carved from stone. A strong jaw shadowed with unkempt stubble, high cheekbones hollowed by what looked like deliberate hunger, and eyes that were the deep gray of storm clouds over mountains, holding an intensity that made her wolf stir unexpectedly in her chest. Those eyes found hers across the square, and for a moment, everything else faded. The noise of the market, Lark's hand in hers, the ache of hunger in her belly, all of it dissolved under the weight of that gaze. "He's no ordinary beggar," she thought with sudden certainty. "Something is wrong here." Another pack member passed by, deliberately stepping on the beggar's outstretched leg. This time, Alara saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, saw his fingers curl against the cobblestones, but still, he didn't retaliate, didn't even make a sound. Why? He was clearly strong enough to fight back. She could see it in the breadth of his shoulders, the corded muscle visible where his rags had torn. Why was he letting them treat him this way? "Alara," Lark said again, more insistently. She made her decision before she could think better of it. "Wait here," she told her brother, pressing him gently toward a nearby barrel. Just for a moment, Alara approached the beggar slowly, aware of the curious and disdainful looks from wolves around her. An Omega approaching a vagrant. They probably thought she was mad. Maybe she was. She knelt before him, and those storm-gray eyes tracked her movement with an alertness that belied his weakened appearance. Up close, she could see the sharp intelligence behind them, The careful assessment. When did you last eat? She asked softly. He didn't answer. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps he'd been silent so long he'd forgotten how to speak. Alara reached into the pocket of her worn dress and pulled out the small bundle she'd been saving. The dried fish and half potato, wrapped in a scrap of clean cloth. Everything she had. Everything that stood between her and Lark and another night of hollow hunger. She placed it in his scarred hands. It's not much, she whispered. But it's yours. His fingers closed around the bundle, and when he looked up at her, something flickered in those gray depths. For just a heartbeat, less than a blink, his eyes blazed molten gold. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. She scrambled backward, nearly falling, her wolf howling with recognition inside her chest. But when she looked again, his eyes were gray. Just gray, and he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't name. The food clutched against his chest like she'd handed him something far more precious than a poor Omega's last meal. What were you thinking? Lark demanded as they hurried away from the square. For an 8-year-old, he had a remarkable talent for sounding like a disapproving elder. That was our dinner, Alara. Our only dinner. I know, she said quietly, her mind still reeling from what she'd seen, or thought she'd seen. Gold eyes were the mark of alpha blood, true alpha blood. But that was absurd. No alpha would be sitting in rags, letting lesser wolves abuse him without consequence. Now, what are we going to eat? Lark continued, his voice climbing with worry. There's nothing left at home. I checked this morning. I'll figure something out. The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. I can forage in the eastern woods tomorrow. There might be late berries, or mushrooms near the creek. Lark fell silent, which was somehow worse than his complaints. He was too young to have learned such resignation. Too young to accept hunger as simply another part of life. They walked the dirt path toward the outskirts of pack territory, where the cottages grew smaller and more dilapidated. Their homes sat at the very edge, a single-room structure with gaps in the walls that let winter wind whistle through. Their parents had died 2 years ago in a rogue attack, leaving Alara to raise Lark alone. No family would take them in. No alpha would claim an omega with a dependent pup and nothing to offer. So they survived. Barely. Alara. Lark's voice had changed, dropping to a frightened whisper. Someone's following us. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. Her wolf senses had already caught it. Footsteps behind them. Keeping pace. Making no effort to hide. Keep walking, she murmured to Lark. Stay calm. But the footsteps grew closer. And then a familiar voice rang out behind her. Well, well. The little Omega and her runt. Alara's blood went cold. She turned slowly to face Valdrick's enforcer, a cruel-eyed beta named Soren, who had been watching her with increasing interest for months. Good evening, Soren, she said carefully, positioning herself between him and Lark. I saw what you did in the square. Soren's smile didn't reach his eyes. Feeding vagrants now, as if you have food to spare. He stepped closer, and Alara caught the sour tang of ale on his breath. Beta Valdrick has been asking about you, says it's time unmated Omegas started contributing properly to the pack. Alara's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what that meant. Valdrick had been consolidating power since the Alpha King's disappearance, and part of that consolidation meant claiming Omegas for his loyal followers. Whether those Omegas were willing or not, I contribute, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I work the herb gardens. I help with the pups when mothers need rest. That's not the kind of contribution he means. Soren reached for her arm. Don't touch my sister. Lark launched himself at the beta with more courage than sense, his small fists swinging wildly. Soren backhanded him without hesitation. Lark hit the ground hard, a cry of pain escaping his lips, and something inside Alara snapped. A growl tore from her throat, raw and primal, and she felt her wolf surge forward with protective fury. But before she could move, before Soren could grab her, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. The beggar stood there, no longer slumped or broken. He'd straightened to his full height, and Alara realized with shock that he was enormous, taller than Soren by half a head, shoulders broad enough to block the fading sunlight. His gray eyes had gone flat and cold, fixed on the beta with an intensity that made the air feel thin. Walk away, the beggar said. His voice was low and rough, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. But beneath the rasp was something that made Alara's knees want to buckle. Command. Absolute, undeniable command. Soren laughed, though it came out slightly strangled. You dare threaten me, vagrant? Do you know who I am? The beggar moved faster than Alara's eyes could track. One moment, Soren was sneering. The next, he was on his knees in the dirt, the beggar's scarred hand wrapped around his throat, claws extending just enough to prick the skin. I said, walk away. The words were barely human now, more growl than speech. Touch them again, and I'll tear your throat out with my teeth. Soren's face had gone purple. He clawed at the beggar's grip, feet scrabbling uselessly against the ground. For a long, terrible moment, Alara thought she was about to witness a killing. Then the beggar released him. Soren collapsed, gasping and retching, before scrambling to his feet and fleeing down the path without a backward glance. The beggar watched him go, then swayed dangerously on his feet. Lark. Alara rushed to her brother first, helping him sit up, checking the bruise already forming on his cheek. Are you all right? I'm okay, Lark mumbled, though his eyes were fixed on the beggar with something like awe. A heavy thud made them both turn. The beggar had collapsed, face down in the dirt, utterly still. Alara's heart clenched with sudden, irrational fear. She scrambled to his side, pressing her fingers to his neck. His pulse was there, but thready. Weak, his skin burned with fever beneath her touch. And when she pulled back his ragged collar, she gasped. A wound stretched across his shoulder and chest. Not a fresh cut, but something far worse. The flesh was mottled with black veins that spread like spiderwebs beneath his skin, pulsing faintly with a sickly light. Poison, her wolf whispered. Old poison. He's been fighting it for days. We can't leave him here, Lark said quietly. Appearing at her elbow. Lark, he's too heavy. I can't carry him. Then we drag him. Her brother's jaw was set with determination. He saved us, Alara. We have to try. Alara looked down at the unconscious stranger, this enigmatic beggar, with his alpha eyes and his deadly reflexes, and his poisoned blood. Every instinct screamed that bringing him home was dangerous, that she was inviting catastrophe into their already precarious lives. But he had defended them, had put himself between Lark and harm without hesitation, had looked at her in the square like she was something precious simply for offering a scrap of food. Help me with his shoulders, she said. The cottage had never felt smaller than it did, with an unconscious alpha sprawled across the floor. Alara had pushed their meager furniture against the walls to make room, spreading their only blanket beneath him. By the flickering light of a single tallow candle, she could finally see the full extent of his condition. The black veins had spread further, creeping up his neck and down his arm like dark roots seeking purchase in his flesh. His breathing came in shallow, labored gasps, and sweat beaded on his brow despite the chill that seeped through the cottage walls. Is he going to die? Lark asked, from the corner where Alara had made him sit. Not if I can help it, she replied, though uncertainty gnawed at her gut. Alara knew herbs. Their mother had taught her before the rogue attack, passing down knowledge that had been in their family for generations. But this poison was unlike anything she'd ever seen. It seemed almost alive, fighting her attempts to clean the wound, recoiling from the poultices she applied. There's nothing in my stores that can touch this, she admitted, sitting back on her heels. I don't even know what kind of poison this is. The stranger's eyes snapped open. Alara jerked backward with a startled cry. His hand shot out, catching her wrist before she could retreat, his grip fevered and unyielding. Don't, he rasped, his gray eyes wild with delirium. Don't let them see. They'll know. They'll know what I am. You're safe, Alara said, trying to keep her voice calm despite her racing heart. No one knows you're here. But he wasn't looking at her. His gaze had gone distant, fixed on something she couldn't see. His lips moved, forming words in a language she didn't recognize. Ancient words. Words that made her wolf whimper with instinctive recognition. Then his eyes found hers, and they were gold. Pure, blazing gold, like molten sunlight trapped in his skull. Mate, he breathed. The word hit Alara like a physical blow. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron despite his weakened state. He drew her closer, and she caught his scent for the first time. Beneath the dirt and sweat and sickness was something that made her entire body ignite with recognition. Pine and wood smoke, rain on stone, the wild heart of the forest itself. You have to let me go, she whispered. though her wolf was howling in protest, straining toward him with fierce longing. His free hand rose to her face, trembling fingers tracing her cheekbone with breathtaking tenderness. He spoke again in that ancient tongue, his voice breaking on the words like they were sacred, like they were a prayer. "I don't understand," Alara said, tears pricking her eyes for reasons she couldn't name. His hand slid from her cheek to her throat, and she felt the fever heat of his palm against her pulse. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin where her neck met her shoulder, and a shudder ran through her entire body. "Please," she tried again, but the word came out breathless. His eyes searched her face with fierce intensity, and then, with a movement too fast to follow, he pulled her down, and his teeth sank into her throat. Elara's scream caught in her chest, emerging as a strangled gasp. Pain lanced through her, sharp and electric, radiating from the bite, in white-hot waves. Her hands found his shoulders, meaning to push him away, but her fingers only curled into his ragged shirt as something far more overwhelming flooded her senses. Heat. Searing, unimaginable heat pouring through her veins like liquid fire. Every nerve ending came alive, every inch of her skin suddenly hypersensitive. She could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own, could taste his emotions bleeding through the contact. Need. Recognition. A possessive, primal joy that should have terrified her but instead made her wolf sing with answering triumph. His tongue traced across the wound, rough and warm, and Alara heard herself make a sound that would have humiliated her under any other circumstances. The pain was fading now, transforming into something else entirely, something that made her want to press closer instead of pull away. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. His golden eyes rolled back, and he went limp against the blanket, unconscious once more. Alara knelt there, swaying, one hand pressed to her bleeding throat. Her entire body trembled with aftershocks of sensation she couldn't process. Lark was saying something from across the room, his voice high with panic, but she couldn't make out the words over the roaring in her ears. "What just happened? What did he do to me?" She staggered to her feet, making it 3 steps toward the water basin before the pain hit. It started in her bones, a deep grinding ache like her skeleton was trying to rearrange itself. Then it spread to her muscles, her joints, and every fiber of her being suddenly on fire. Alara dropped to her knees with a cry, her vision going white at the edges. Through the agony, she heard Lark screaming her name, felt his small hands on her shoulders, trying to help her up, but the pain was swallowing her whole, dragging her down into darkness. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was the bite mark on her shoulder, where her blood was slowly turning silver. Alara woke to pale morning light filtering through the gaps in the cottage walls. Her body ached as if she'd been trampled by horses, but when her hand flew instinctively to her throat, she found only smooth skin, tender, yes, sensitive in ways that made her shiver, but whole. "That's not possible," she thought. He bit through to muscle. "I felt it." She sat up slowly, her head swimming, and found Lark asleep in the corner, curled into a tight ball with his back against the wall. He must have stayed awake watching over her for hours, before exhaustion claimed him. The stranger lay where they'd left him, but something had changed. His breathing was deeper now, steadier, the gray pallor had faded from his skin. And when Alara leaned closer to check his wound, she gasped. The black veins were retreating. Not gone entirely, but visibly diminished, as if something had begun fighting the poison from within. Whatever connection the bite had forged between them, it seemed to be working both ways, her strength bolstering his, even as the incomplete bond drained her own reserves. What happened last night? She wondered. What did we do to each other? As if sensing her attention, his eyes opened. Gray. Just gray. But alert now, clear of fever, watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You're awake," she said unnecessarily. He studied her face for a long moment before his gaze dropped to her throat. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, guilt, and beneath it, a fierce satisfaction he couldn't quite hide. Alara's hand moved self-consciously to cover the unmarked skin. "It healed," she said. "I don't understand how, but it healed." He spoke then, his voice rough but stronger than before. The words were foreign, that same ancient language from his delirium, but his tone was unmistakably apologetic. "I don't understand you," Alara said softly. He frowned, then pressed a scarred hand to his own chest. "Riven, his name." He was giving her his name. Riven, she repeated carefully, and was rewarded with a slight softening around his eyes. She touched her own chest. Elara, Elara. The way he said it made her pulse quicken, like the syllables were something precious, like her name was a word he'd been waiting his whole life to speak. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Elara couldn't define. Then Lark stirred in the corner, breaking the spell. "You're awake!" Her brother scrambled to his feet, rushing over with none of Elara's caution. "I thought you were both going to die." Elara was making these horrible sounds, "and you wouldn't wake up no matter how much I shook you. And there was all this silver stuff in her blood. And I didn't know what to do. So I just kept the fire going, and—" "Lark," Elara interrupted gently. "Breathe." Riven was watching the boy with an expression that made Elara's heart twist. Warmth, genuine warmth, directed at her rambling little brother as if his flood of words was the most delightful thing he'd heard in years. He spoke to Lark, a gentle question in that liquid language. "I don't know what you're saying," Lark said. "But I'm glad you're not dead." Riven's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Over the next 2 days, they developed a rhythm. Riven's strength returned with remarkable speed, the bond accelerating his healing in ways that defied natural law, though the black veins still lingered on his shoulder like stubborn shadows. He couldn't communicate in words, but he found other ways. He carved Lark a small wolf from a piece of firewood, the details so intricate that Elara wondered what hands like his had been made for before they learned to beg. He caught fish from the creek when Elara mentioned their empty stores, returning with enough to feed them for a week. He watched her work with the herbs she'd gathered, his gray eyes following her movements with such focused attention that she found herself explaining each plant's properties aloud, even knowing he couldn't understand. And sometimes, when their fingers brushed passing a cup or reaching for the same item, Elara felt that jolt of connection again. That sense of something vast and inevitable, hovering just beyond her comprehension. She caught him looking at her throat more than once. Each time, that mixture of guilt and satisfaction would cross his features before he looked away. On the 3rd evening, Lark had fallen asleep early. Exhausted from helping Riven with small tasks around the cottage all day, Elara sat by the fire, mending a tear in her only spare dress. When she felt Riven settle beside her, he didn't speak, didn't try to communicate through gestures. He simply sat close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, and watched the flames dance. "I don't know what you are," Elara said quietly, not looking at him. "I don't know why you were in that square, or why you let them treat you that way, or what that poison is doing to your blood." She paused, her needle stilling. "But I know you're not just a beggar." Riven was silent for a long moment. Then his hand found hers in the firelight, his rough fingers curling around her palm with careful gentleness. Elara finally looked at him and found his gray eyes waiting. He raised her hand, slowly, deliberately, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The kiss was soft, reverent, a promise in a language that needed no translation. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Riven." A howl split the night air. Riven was on his feet instantly, every line of his body gone rigid with alertness. Another howl answered the first, then another, until the darkness beyond the cottage walls seemed alive with them. "What is that?" Elara whispered, pulling Lark close as the boy jerked awake. Riven moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. The firelight caught his profile, and Elara saw his expression shift. Not fear, recognition. He turned back to her and spoke urgently, gesturing toward the door, the forest, himself. A command and a plea wrapped together. Before Elara could respond, she saw them through the window gap. Wolves. Massive wolves with silver-gray fur and eyes that gleamed gold in the moonlight. Dozens of them, circling the cottage in a silent, predatory ring. And they were looking at Riven like they were waiting for orders. "Stay inside," Riven commanded. Elara startled at the words. Accented, rough with disuse, but undeniably her language. "You can speak, stay inside," he repeated, already moving toward the door. "Protect the pup." He was gone before she could argue, slipping into the night to join the wolves that parted around him like water around stone. Elara watched through the window, her heart in her throat, as Riven walked among the massive creatures. He moved differently now. The broken beggar had vanished entirely, replaced by something that made her wolf want to bare her throat in submission. He was speaking to them. Not in the common tongue, or even the ancient language she'd heard before, but in growls and low rumbles that the wolves seemed to understand perfectly. One by one, they responded, pressing their muzzles to his hands, his shoulders, his face. Alara. Lark's voice was small but steady. What is he? Before she could answer, another sound cut through the night. Horses. Coming fast along the path from Thornhaven, the wolves melted into the shadows as if they'd never existed. Riven turned toward the cottage, and Alara saw the conflict in his eyes. Stay and fight. Leave and protect. He made his choice in a heartbeat. The cottage door burst open, and Riven crossed to Alara in 3 strides. His hands framed her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. They come for you, he said, his voice low and urgent. Because of me, because they felt my wolves. I don't understand. Valdrick knows something has changed. He will use you to find me. Riven's thumbs traced her cheekbones with tender urgency. I cannot let that happen. Then stay, Alara heard herself say. Fight them with us. Something broke in his expression. If I stay, they will kill you to punish me. If I fight, they will bring the whole pack down on this cottage. His forehead pressed to hers. I must go. Draw them away. Keep you safe. Riven. I will come back, he swore, the words fierce and raw. When you are no longer in danger, when I have dealt with the rot in this pack, I will come back for you. The horses were closer now. Alara could hear voices shouting commands. Riven pulled back just enough to look at her. His gray eyes had gone molten gold again, blazing with emotion he couldn't hide. My mate, he said, pressing one final kiss to her forehead. My heart. Then he was gone. Alara stumbled to the window in time to see him sprint toward the tree line. His form seemed to blur as he ran. And then, where a man had been, there was a wolf, massive and black as midnight, with eyes like burning gold. The wolves from the shadows emerged to flank him, and together they vanished into the forest. Alara stood frozen, her mind reeling. He's a wolf. He can shift. The door crashed inward. Soren stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 enforcers. His face was mottled with bruises from his last encounter with Riven, and his eyes burned with vengeful fury. Where is he? He snarled, shoving into the cottage. Alara pushed Lark behind her. Where is who? The backhand caught her across the cheek, snapping her head to the side. She tasted blood. Don't play games with me, Omega. Soren grabbed her arm, his claws extending to prick her skin. We know you've been harboring someone. We felt the wolves circling. Valdrick wants answers. I don't know what you're talking about, Alara said through gritted teeth. Soren's smile was ugly. Then you can explain that to Beta Valdrick yourself. He's very interested in speaking with you. His gaze dropped to her throat, and his eyes narrowed. What's that mark on your neck? Alara's blood went cold. She thought the bite had healed completely, but apparently something remained. Something visible. Interesting, Soren murmured. Very interesting. He yanked her toward the door. Bring the boy too. Valdrick will want leverage. No! Alara fought against his grip. Leave Lark out of this. He's just a child. But her struggles were useless against 4 enforcers. They dragged her and Lark into the night, toward the horses waiting on the path, and Alara felt the fragile hope that had bloomed in her chest over the past 3 days begin to shatter. Riven, she thought urgently, reaching for the strange connection she could still feel, humming beneath her skin. Riven, something's wrong, but the forest was silent, and the wolves were gone. 3 weeks had passed since the night Riven disappeared, and Alara was dying. Not quickly, not obviously, but something inside her was failing, bit by bit, and she could feel herself fading like a candle burned down to the wick. The cell beneath Valdrick's manor was damp and cold. They'd separated her from Lark on the first night, and that separation was its own kind of torture. She didn't know where they were keeping him, didn't know if he was safe, or fed, or frightened. All she knew was the pain. It came in waves, crashing over her without warning. Her bones would grind against each other. Her muscles would seize and spasm. Her skin would burn as if fire ran beneath it instead of blood. And the dreams. The dreams were the worst. Every time unconsciousness claimed her, she found herself running through moonlit forests in a body that wasn't her own. 4 legs instead of 2. Fur instead of skin. And always, The urgent need to find something. Someone. She would wake gasping, her throat raw from screams she didn't remember making, and for a few terrible moments, she wouldn't know who or what she was. The bond, she whispered to herself in the darkness. It's the incomplete bond. She'd pieced together enough from overheard conversations to understand. Valdrick's healers had examined her, prodded the mark on her throat, and spoken in hushed voices about claims and transformations, and unthinkable survivals. An alpha had bitten her, claimed her, and her body was trying to change to match his. But the change couldn't complete without him, without whatever magic bound them together. So instead, it was killing her. On the 22nd day, they dragged her from the cell. Alara could barely walk. The enforcers had to half-carry her through the manor's stone corridors, upstairs that seemed to go on forever, until they reached a set of ornate doors. Valdrick's private chambers. The beta sat behind a massive desk, his silver hair immaculate, and his cold eyes watching her approach with clinical interest. He was handsome in the way of predators, sharp and dangerous and utterly without warmth. "Leave us," he said to the enforcers. The doors closed, and Alara was alone with the wolf who had ruled Thornhaven since the Alpha King's disappearance. "You've caused me considerable trouble," Valdrick said conversationally. "Do you know that?" Alara remained silent, conserving what little strength she had. 3 weeks ago, my scouts detected a massive surge of alpha energy near your pathetic cottage. Not just any alpha energy. Valdrick leaned forward. Royal energy, the kind that hasn't been felt in this territory for 3 months. Alara's heart stuttered. "Imagine my surprise," Valdrick continued, "when I discovered that surge was centered on an unmated Omega with nothing to her name but a dying cottage and an orphaned pup." His eyes glittered. "An Omega, who now bears a claiming mark that shouldn't exist." "I don't know what you're talking about," Alara whispered. Valdrick smiled, and it was terrifying. "Yes, you do. You were harboring the Alpha King." The words hit Alara like a physical blow. Alpha King. Riven was the Alpha King, the beggar in the square, the man she'd fed her last meal, the wolf who'd called her mate and vanished into the night. He was their missing king. "I see the understanding in your eyes," Valdrick said with satisfaction. "Good, that makes this simpler." He rose from his desk and circled toward her. "The Alpha King has been a thorn in my side for far too long. His bloodline is too strong, his wolves too loyal. I've spent years working to undermine him, and I was so close to success." "The poison," Alara breathed. "You poisoned him. A special concoction. It takes months to work through an alpha's system, weakening them slowly enough that no one notices until it's too late." Valdrick's smile widened. "I'd been dosing his food for nearly a year. He should have died quietly, and I would have claimed the throne with no one the wiser. But he survived," he suspected. "Went underground before the poison could finish its work. Wandered among the pack as a beggar, testing loyalties, gathering evidence." Valdrick's expression soured. "And then you interfered. You fed him, sheltered him, and somehow, the bond you formed helped him fight off months of careful work. He was close now. Too close." Alara could smell the rot beneath his expensive cologne. "But you've given me something even better," Valdrick said, his hand shooting out to grip her chin. "A claiming mark from the Alpha King himself. Do you understand what that means?" Alara tried to pull away, but she was too weak. "It means," Valdrick hissed, "that when I claim you myself, I'll be severing his bond, stealing his mate. The humiliation alone will destroy him." He leaned closer. "And then I'll use you to draw him out of hiding, and I'll finish what I started." "He'll kill you," Alara spat. "He'll try." Valdrick released her chin and straightened. "The claiming ceremony will be tomorrow night. You should feel honored. Beta wolves rarely get the opportunity to bond with Omegas of such significance." "I won't let you," Valdrick laughed. "You can barely stand. What exactly are you going to do?" The pain hit her then, worse than it had ever been. Alara screamed as her bones began to crack and shift, her body convulsing on the floor of Valdrick's chamber. Through the agony, she heard him calling for guards, heard running footsteps and shouting voices, and then she heard something else. Howls. Dozens of them, rising from every direction, shaking the very walls of the manor. Valdrick's face went white. "That's not possible. They couldn't have." The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. A black wolf the size of a small horse landed in the center of the room, its golden eyes fixed on Valdric with murderous intent. Behind it, through the shattered window, Alara could see more wolves pouring over the manor walls. The black wolf's form rippled, and suddenly Riven stood there. Naked, and terrible, and magnificent. "Touch her again," he said, his voice barely human. "And I will tear this pack apart stone by stone." Valdric stumbled backward. "Guards! Guards!" But the guards weren't coming. From the sounds echoing through the manor, they had problems of their own. Riven crossed to Alara in 2 strides, gathering her convulsing body into his arms. His skin was fever-hot against hers, and the moment they touched, the pain began to recede. "Hold on," he growled against her hair. "I've got you. I've got you, my heart." Then he was running, carrying her through the chaos, and Alara let herself fall into the safety of his arms, as darkness claimed her once more. Alara woke in stages, consciousness returning like tidewater, creeping up the shore. First came awareness of warmth, of soft furs beneath her aching body, of flickering firelight dancing against her closed eyelids. Then came the sounds. Hushed voices speaking in that ancient tongue she'd heard Riven use. The crackle of flames, the distant howl of wolves. She opened her eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling of stone and timber, ancient beams carved with symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the firelight. "She wakes." A woman's voice, weathered with age but sharp with authority. Alara turned her head to find an elderly wolf sitting beside the bed, her silver hair braided with leather cords, her dark eyes bright with intelligence. Behind her stood 2 younger wolves, male and female, watching Alara with expressions caught between curiosity and suspicion. "Where am I?" Alara's voice came out as a rasp. "Shadowfen Keep," the old woman replied. "The ancient seat of the royal bloodline. I am Marin, elder healer of the king's inner circle." "The king." "Riven." Alara tried to sit up, gasping as pain lanced through her chest. "Riven, where is he?" "Is he? The Alpha King is alive." Marin's hand pressed firmly against Alara's shoulder, easing her back down. "Thanks to you, it seems, the poison that should have killed him has nearly vanished from his blood. I don't understand how I helped. I barely did anything." Marin studied her for a long moment. "You fed him when he was starving, sheltered him when he was hunted, and when his wolf claimed you in fever madness, your life force began fighting the poison alongside his." The elder's eyes dropped to Alara's throat. "The bond saved him. But I'm afraid it may have doomed you in the process." Alara's hand moved instinctively to the mark. "The incomplete bond. I know. It's been killing me, not just killing you." Marin's expression grew grave. "Transforming you. Your body is caught between states, neither fully human, nor fully wolf. The claiming bite triggered a change that cannot be stopped, only completed or—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Or I die," Alara whispered. "Yes." The door burst open, and Riven strode in like a storm made flesh. He was dressed now in the garments of a king, dark leather and silver clasps, a cloak of midnight fur across his shoulders. But his eyes were wild with worry as they found Alara. "Leave us," he commanded, without looking at the others. They obeyed instantly, even Marin, though the old healer cast a meaningful look at Alara before closing the door. Riven crossed to the bed and dropped to his knees beside her, his hands finding hers with tender urgency. "You're awake," he breathed. "When you collapsed at the manor, I thought I'd lost you." "Your English has improved dramatically," Alara managed weakly. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "I always knew your tongue. I spent years learning it, preparing to unite our peoples." The smile faded. "I stayed silent at first because I didn't know if I could trust anyone. And then, after the bite, I stayed silent because I was ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" "Of what I did to you," his voice cracked. "I claimed you without consent, bound you to me while lost in fever and poison, condemned you to this." His hand rose to her throat, hovering over the mark without quite touching it. "Every moment of your suffering has been my fault. Riven, I should have been stronger, should have fought the instinct. But when my wolf sensed you, sensed your compassion and your courage, and your beautiful, stubborn heart, it knew." His gray eyes glistened. "It knew you were mine." Alara reached up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. "Then maybe you should have asked first." He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I'm asking now. There's a ritual, ancient magic from the first wolves. If performed under the blood moon, it could complete your transformation, give you a wolf of your own, save your life. Could? The survival rate for humans is low, 1 in 20, perhaps, but the blood moon strengthens the wolf spirit, and with our bond already partially formed. He swallowed hard. It's your only chance. And if I refuse? Then you die anyway, slowly, painfully. And his voice broke completely. And I would follow you into the darkness before I let you go alone. The weight of his words settled over Alara like a physical thing. He meant it. If she died, he would die too. Whether by his own hand, or from the severing of an incomplete bond, she didn't know. But the certainty in his eyes left no room for doubt. Lark? She said suddenly. Where's Lark? They took him when they captured me. Safe. Riven's thumb stroked across her knuckles. My wolves recovered him from Valdrick's cells. He's being looked after by the pack's pupkeepers. He asks about you constantly. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. I need to see him. After the ritual. Riven pressed his forehead to hers. Tonight is the blood moon. The timing is the only mercy we've been given. Please, Alara, let me try to save you. Let me make right what I've done. She looked into his gray eyes and saw everything there. Love, guilt, hope, terror. This wolf king, who had walked among his people as a beggar, who had let himself be abused and degraded to uncover the rot in his pack, who had called her mate, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Yes, she whispered. I'll try. The ritual chamber lay deep beneath Shadowfen Keep, carved from living rock in an age when wolves and magic were one. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows across ancient symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. Alara stood at the center of a stone circle, wearing nothing but a thin shift of white linen. Around her, the pack's elders had gathered, their voices rising in a chant that made her blood hum with strange resonance. Riven stood just outside the circle, his golden eyes fixed on her face. He'd explained what would happen. The elders would call the wolf spirit forth, and Alara's body would either accept the transformation or be destroyed by it. No matter what happens, he'd told her before they began. Know that I love you. That my wolf recognized you as its mate the moment you knelt before a beggar and offered him everything you had. Now, as the chanting grew louder and the torchlight seemed to pulse with each word, Alara felt the change beginning. It started as warmth, spreading from the mark on her throat through her entire body. Then the warmth became heat, and the heat became fire, and suddenly she was burning from the inside out. She screamed as her bones began to crack and shift. Her vision went white with agony. She could feel her body trying to reshape itself, could feel the wolf spirit clawing at the edges of her consciousness, straining to emerge. But something was wrong. There was a wall inside her, a barrier that the wolf couldn't breach. Every time the transformation pushed forward, that wall pushed back, and the competing forces were tearing her apart. She's fighting it. Marin's voice cut through the chaos. Her body won't surrender. Alara collapsed to the stone floor, convulsing, her screams echoing off the ancient walls. Through the haze of pain, she saw Riven trying to break through the circle, held back by the elders who knew that interrupting the ritual would kill them both. Alara. His roar shook the chamber. Alara, let go, stop fighting. But she couldn't. She didn't know how. Her body had spent too many years protecting itself, too many years surviving against crushing odds. It didn't know how to surrender, even when surrender meant salvation. The fire inside her flared one final time, brighter than the sun, and then everything went dark. When Riven reached her, she wasn't breathing. He gathered her limp body in his arms, pressed his ear to her chest, and heard nothing. No heartbeat, no whisper of life. No, the word tore from his throat. No, no, no. He tried to breathe life into her lungs, pressed his hands to her chest and pushed, again and again, willing her heart to beat. The elders stood frozen around him, their faces masks of grief. Please, Riven begged, his voice breaking into something barely human. Please don't leave me. I just found you. I can't. Beneath his hands, he felt the faintest flutter. A heartbeat, weak and thready, but there. She lives, Marin breathed. Barely. But she lives. Riven's relief lasted only a moment before he understood the truth. The ritual had failed, Alara's body had rejected the transformation, but the attempt had drained what little strength she had left. She would die. Not today, perhaps, not tomorrow. But soon. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. He stayed beside her through the night, holding her hand as her breathing grew shallower and her skin grew cold. By dawn, she still hadn't woken, and Riven knew what he had to do. Summon the Council of Elders, he said, his voice hollow. I have a decree to make. Marin's face went pale. My king, you cannot mean. I claimed her without consent. I condemned her to death with my weakness. Riven pressed a final kiss to Alara's cold forehead. The law is clear. My life for hers. Perhaps in death, the bond will release her. Perhaps she'll have a chance. And if she wakes to find you gone? Riven closed his eyes against the pain. Then tell her I'm sorry. Tell her she was the best thing that ever happened to a beggar king. He rose, squaring his shoulders. Tell her I loved her. Even if I never deserved to. He walked out of the chamber without looking back, because if he looked back, he would never be able to leave. Alara dreamed of running. 4 legs instead of 2, carrying her across moonlit landscapes that shifted like water. Mountains rose and fell around her. Forests whispered secrets in languages she almost understood. And always, there was a black wolf running beside her, its golden eyes bright with joy. Stay with me, the black wolf said in Riven's voice. Stay with me forever. I'm trying, she told him. I'm trying, but I can't find my way. The dream shifted, and suddenly Riven was in chains, kneeling on a stone platform, while hooded figures approached with silver blades. No! Alara screamed, but her voice made no sound. It's all right, Riven said, his eyes finding hers across the vast distance. You're free now. Live well, my heart. Live for both of us. The blade rose. Alara woke screaming. She was alone in the chamber. The torches burned down to embers, her body weak but no longer racked with pain. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Then, it all came flooding back. The ritual, the failed transformation, the darkness that had swallowed her whole. Riven, she croaked, struggling to sit up. Riven. The door burst open, and Lark rushed in, his small face streaked with tears. Alara. He threw himself into her arms, sobbing. They said you were dead. They said you weren't going to wake up. She held him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her brother, anchoring herself to the reality of his presence. I'm here. I'm all right. Where's Riven? Lark's sobs intensified. He's gone. They took him to the old stones, the ones where the first wolves made their vows. Cold dread settled in Alara's stomach. What do you mean? They took him. He ordered it himself. A new voice. Marin stood in the doorway, her weathered face drawn with grief. When the ritual failed, when we thought you would die, he invoked the ancient law, a king's life, for his mate's freedom. No, Alara was already moving, throwing off the furs, her legs trembling beneath her. No, he can't. I'm not dead. The bond isn't. The ritual party left at dawn for the sacred stones, Marin said. It's half a day's journey through rough terrain. Even if you could walk, you'd never reach them in time. Watch me. Alara made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She crashed to the stone floor, her body screaming in protest. The failed transformation had left her weaker than a newborn pup. But through that weakness, she felt something else. The bond. Still there. Still humming beneath her skin. And through it, she could feel Riven's emotions bleeding into her own. Peace. Resignation. Love so vast it made her chest ache. He was ready to die. Ready to die for her. No. Alara snarled, pushing herself up on trembling arms. I won't let him. Child, you can barely stand. Then I'll crawl. She dragged herself toward the door. Every movement, agony, every breath a battle. Lark tried to help her, his small hands supporting her weight, but she was too heavy, too broken. She made it to the corridor before collapsing again. Please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please, I have to reach him. I have to. Something stirred deep inside her. Not the wall that had blocked the transformation. Something else. Something that had been waiting, watching, biding its time. Let me help, a voice whispered in her mind. Not her voice. Something older. Something wild. Alara understood then. The ritual hadn't failed completely. The wolf spirit was there, trapped behind her barriers, waiting for her to stop fighting and let it in. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, the wolf replied. But he's dying. Our mate is dying. And we're the only ones who can save him. Alara thought of Riven kneeling in chains, ready to die for a beggar's bride. Thought of his hands cupping her face, his voice breaking as he called her his heart. Thought of everything they could have been, everything they still could be, if only she was brave enough to reach for it. Yes, she whispered. Yes, take me, save him. The barriers crumbled. The transformation hit her like a lightning strike. Her bones shattered and reformed, her muscles tore and rebuilt, her skin rippled with silver-white fur. But this time, instead of fighting, she surrendered. Let the wolf spirit flood through her, fill her, become her. When the agony faded, Elara stood on 4 legs. She was smaller than Riven's wolf, sleek and silver, where he was massive and dark. But she was fast. She could feel the power coiled in her new muscles, the strength singing through her transformed body. Run, the wolf spirit urged. Run like the wind, and don't stop until we reach him. Alara ran. She burst from Shadowfen Keep like a silver arrow, racing across the highland landscape with supernatural speed. The world looked different through wolf eyes, sharper, more vivid, alive with scents and sounds she'd never known existed. And threading through it all, like a golden rope tied around her heart, was the bond, leading her unerringly toward her mate. She ran through forests, and across rivers, over hills and through valleys, her paws barely touching the ground. The sun climbed higher, then began to fall, and still she ran. Finally, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, she saw them. The sacred stones rose from a hilltop clearing, ancient monoliths arranged in a perfect circle. Within that circle, wolves in human form had gathered, their faces solemn, and at the center, kneeling before an elder with a silver blade, was Riven. His head was bowed, his wrists bound with ceremonial rope. He looked peaceful, ready. No! The word tore from Alara's throat as she shifted mid-stride, tumbling back into human form and crashing through the circle of watchers. She landed hard, skinning her palms on the rough stone. But she was already scrambling forward. Stop! Stop the ritual! Every head turned toward her. She saw shock register on face after face as they recognized what she was. A human who had completed the transformation, who had become wolf when such a thing should have been unthinkable. But she only had eyes for Riven. He was staring at her like she was a ghost, like she was a miracle. Tears streamed down his face, and when he spoke, his voice shattered on her name. Alara. How are you? You absolute fool, she sobbed, crawling toward him. Did you really think I would let you die? Did you really think I would want to live in a world without you? She reached him and threw herself into his arms, bound wrists and all. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body shaking with sobs. I thought I'd killed you, he choked out. The ritual failed. You weren't breathing. I couldn't feel you through the bond anymore. The bond saved me. Alara pulled back enough to look at him, her hands framing his tear-streaked face. Your love saved me. It gave me something to fight for. Around them, the gathered wolves had begun to murmur. The elder with the blade lowered it slowly, confusion warring with wonder on his weathered features. She completed the transformation, someone whispered. A human completed the transformation outside of a blood moon. Unthinkable. Another voice argued. Look at her eyes. A third said. They're gold. She's one of us now. Alara didn't care about their whispers. Didn't care about anything except the man kneeling before her, alive and whole and here. I'm claiming you, she said fiercely. Right now, in front of everyone. So you can never pull something this stupid again. Riven let out a wet laugh. Alara, you don't have to. I want to. She gripped his face harder. I love you, Riven. I've loved you since you looked at me like I was precious just for offering you a scrap of fish. I loved you when you protected my brother. I loved you when you left to keep us safe. And I love you now, even though you're an idiot who tried to die without my permission. I love you too, he breathed. My mate. My heart. My soul. Alara leaned in and pressed her teeth to the curve of his throat. The claiming bite was instinct, guided by the wolf spirit that now lived beneath her skin. She felt her fangs lengthen, felt them pierce his flesh, felt the bond between them flare like wildfire. Riven's bound hands came up to grip her waist as a sound escaped him that was half moan, half howl. She felt his emotions pouring into her: love, joy, relief, and a fierce, primal satisfaction that their bond was finally, irrevocably complete. When she pulled back, licking the wound clean, the gathered wolves were silent. Then one of them dropped to his knees, then another, and another, until every wolf in the sacred circle knelt before them, heads bowed in submission to their alpha king and his miraculous queen. Riven cut his bonds on the elder's blade and rose to his feet, pulling Elora up with him. He turned to face his people, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. "My mate," he announced, his voice carrying across the stones. "My queen, the first human in 500 years to survive the claiming and emerge as wolf." A howl rose from the gathered pack. Then another, and another, until the twilight air rang with the voices of wolves, celebrating their king's union. Alara leaned into Riven's side, exhausted and exhilarated, and overwhelmed with joy. She thought of the market square in Thornhaven, of the beggar she'd given her last meal. She thought of Lark, waiting back at Shadowfen Keep, with a carved wolf clutched in his small hands. She thought of everything she'd lost, and everything she'd gained. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Riven turned to look at her, his gray eyes bright with love and promise. "Now we go home," he said. "Now we rebuild the pack together, root out the corruption Valdrick spread, and create a kingdom where no one, human or wolf, is ever treated as less than precious." "That sounds like a lot of work." "It is." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But I've discovered I work better with a partner, especially one stubborn enough to chase me across the highlands and claim me in front of my entire council." Elara smiled, feeling her wolf spirit settle contentedly beneath her skin. She thought of the poorest Omega in Thornhaven, the one who'd had nothing but compassion to offer. That Omega was gone now. In her place stood a queen. "Take me home," she said. And surrounded by the howls of their pack, the Alpha King and his beggar bride walked into their future together.